You're watching the news from the Sultanate of Oman television. First, the headlines. After 14 years, Israeli occupation authorities allow Palestinians residing in the Gaza Strip to perform Friday prayers at Al-Aqsa Mosque. Arab coalition conducts airstrikes on Houthi camps in Sana'a as Wald Sheikh calls on for self-control. And Turkey and Iran pledge greater cooperation on resolving the Syrian crisis. Those were the headlines, and now for the news in detail. For the first time in 14 years, Israeli occupation authorities allowed Palestinians residing in the Gaza Strip to visit Jerusalem to perform Friday prayers at Al-Aqsa Mosque. The people who are allowed to enter should be over 60 years of age. Tens of Palestinians proceeded to Beit Hanun, crossing north of the Strip, and then moved to Al-Aqsa Mosque. Some of them were overwhelmed with emotion as they have not been there since 1967. Israeli occupation forces had stopped the visit program on the 16th of last March under the pretext that some worshippers do not return back to the Gaza Strip. After efforts exerted by the Civilian Affairs Authority of the Palestinian Authority, Israel agreed to allow worshippers who are over 60 to visit. After the war in Gaza in the summer of 2014, initially Israel allowed elderly Palestinians from Gaza Strip to go to Jerusalem to perform Friday prayers in Al-Aqsa Mosque and to return back the same day. Arab coalition jets bombed rebel position in Yemen's capital Sana'a today for a fourth consecutive day in renewed fighting following the breakdown of peace talks. Airstrikes hit a presidential compound and military base in Sana'a early today. Residents and Yemeni media reported airstrikes in the Red Sea port city of Hodeidah and other parts of Yemen. UN-backed talks concluded last Saturday with no agreement on how to end a civil war that has killed more than 10,000 civilians and caused a humanitarian crisis in the country. Meanwhile, the spokeswoman for the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Ravina Shamdasani, said in a news release more than 200 people had been killed in Yemen in 4 months. From his side, the United Nations envoy to Yemen, Ismail Wald al-Sheikh Ahmed, condemned today the increasing violations of cessation of hostilities by the warring sides in Yemen. In his statement, Wald al-Sheikh urged the conflicting parties to reach urgently a comprehensive political solution. He added that occurring violations are unacceptable and do not serve the peace path. He pointed out to the need for making concessions to establish peace in Yemen. Wald al-Sheikh also said that the cessation of hostilities are still valid and each hostile act by any side will be a direct violation and against the Yemeni people. A series of airstrikes in opposition areas in Syria's northern Aleppo province killed at least 18 people today, including children and 2 hospital staffers, when the missiles hit an open market, a women and children's hospital and a village. Meanwhile, US-backed forces battling Daesh militants near the Turkish border in northern Syria said today they had launched a final assault to flush the remaining militants out of the city of Manbij. The Syrian Democratic Forces, with air support from a US-led coalition, said last week they had taken almost complete control of Manbij, where a small number of militants have been held up. The campaign aims to close which was for years a route through which Daesh moved fighters and weapons. Attackers using firebombs and homemade explosives struck popular resort cities and beach towns across Thailand in some of the worst violence to hit the country since a military coup 2 years ago. At least 4 people were killed and dozens wounded, including 11 foreigners. The attacks in South Bangkok and several of the blasts, including one on Patong Beach in Phuket and 4 on the seaside resort city of Hua Hin, appear designed to strike the tourism industry, which provides vital income to the government. Tourism has remained one of the few bright spots, with visitors rising to 30 million in 2015 and more than 14 million having visited by May 2016. The superintendent of police in Hua Hin said the bombs were hidden inside potted plants and were set off by remote control about half an hour apart. He said a Samsung cell phone had been recovered that they have believed was used to detonate at least one of the bombs. Ukraine accused Russia of planning to stoke further unrest as the international community sought to ease tensions after the two sides ramped up the security around the disputed Crimean Peninsula. Russia's FSB security service said on Wednesday it had thwarted terrorist attacks in Crimea this week by Ukrainian military intelligence and beaten back armed assaults, claims Kiev has fiercely denied. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin has pledged to take countermeasures against Ukraine, which he accused of sending saboteurs into Crimea to carry out terrorist attacks. During a closed-door meeting of the UN Security Council yesterday, Ukraine asked Russia to provide evidence to back its accusations, which President Petro Poroshenko had called senseless and cynical. Still to come in our news bulletin, landmines continue to maim and kill across Africa and Asia, but with the rats' help, 83,000 weapons have already been neutralized.
هنا الرائحة العالقة بالذاكرة تأخذنا دهشة مختلفة لتبهرنا بجمالها الآسر حيث ملتقى الأسرة. امنح نفسك شغف التجربة، فهنا حكاية الجمال لا تنتهي. مهرجان صلالة السياحي 2016 من 15 من يوليو إلى 31 من أغسطس. عمان، المحبة والوئام.
Welcome back to the news from the Sultanate of Oman television. The foreign ministers of Turkey and Iran have pledged greater cooperation on resolving the Syrian crisis, despite their differences. At a joint news conference in Ankara today, Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu and his Iranian counterpart Mohammad Javad Zarif said the two neighboring nations also intended to boost trade ties. Zarif, meanwhile, expressed support to Turkey over the last month's failed coup attempt, praising the Turkish people for defying the overthrow and use of force. Turkey has complained about a lack of support from its Western allies over the attempted coup. Turkey and Iran have held opposing oppositions on Syria, with Iran backing the government of Syrian President Bashar Assad and Turkey advocating his departure. Cavusoglu said despite their differences, Turkey and Iran will strengthen cooperation for a lasting peace in Syria. Galicia emergency services struggled today to contain 9 forest fires, 3 of them threatening houses in the northern part of the region in Spain. According to the regional government, the fires have burned 6,000 hectares since Monday. Emergency services maintain the situation too, which denotes a risk to inhabited areas in the towns of Arbo. The causes of the fires remain unknown. There was no immediate information about evacuated people, and families have been evacuated from the towns where the risk is higher. Rats are being trained to sniff out landmines and tuberculosis in Tanzania as part of a project which could one day use rodents to diagnose cancer. More details in the following report.
These rats are part of a mine detection training unit in Tanzania, sniffing out the smell of explosives. They're named John Stewart and Stephen Hawking. And like their namesakes, these giant rats are out of the ordinary.
In these boxes we have buried landmines, so the rat have to pass and sniff, and whenever find the smell of TNT over that landmine, he has to scratch strongly, and the trainer will click and give a reward.
Every year, landmines kill 15,000 to 20,000 people, most of them children. By deploying these rats, Belgium NGO Apopo has already neutralized more than 80,000 landmines in countries like Angola, Mozambique and Cambodia.
In terms of landmine operation, they are weightless. They have less weight to detonate even live mines. So you can work them in any type of mines without any problem.
In a nearby laboratory, Violet and Oprah are moving from test tube to test tube, sniffing out the smell of tuberculosis. Apopo's fiery foes are being deployed to diagnose the disease, which kills more than 1 million people a year.
We increase with an average of 40% over the hospital results. So that gives a good yield of extra positive patients. And by doing so, so far we have already found 10,000 patients which were returned negative by hospitals. And those people, of course, go home, they continue infecting other people. So indirectly, I think we have saved more than 10,000 people.
One rat alone can screen 100 samples in 20 minutes compared to a lab technician who will take 4 days. But despite their successes against both landmines and TB, the Apopo team aren't sitting back. Their next mission for these rodents, to detect cancer.
This is the Sultanate of Oman television. Before we end tonight's bulletin, here are the main points once again. After 14 years, Israeli occupation authorities allowed Palestinians residing in the Gaza Strip to perform Friday prayers at Al-Aqsa Mosque. Arab coalition conducts airstrikes on Houthi camps in Sana'a as World Sheikh calls on for self-control. And Turkey and Iran pledge greater cooperation on resolving the Syrian crisis. With that, we come to the end of tonight's news bulletin. From all of us here in the newsroom and the studios, it's good night.